Welcome to the Olive Grove podcast, where we really try to cut through the noise and get straight to the powerful takeaways from important sources, giving you that insider's edge. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a truly remarkable ancient text, Nehemiah chapter 9. Specifically, we're focusing on what's famously known as the Great Confession. Our guide for this is a really detailed study of this chapter, helping us unravel its profound messages.
Yeah, and our mission today really is to explore how a community's depth reflection on its past, particularly its relationship with God, how that can lead to profound self-realization and, a renewed commitment to a different path. We'll be looking at some powerful themes, what real repentance looks like, God's incredible, unwavering faithfulness, and, humanity's all too familiar struggles.
Absolutely. You're about to uncover some, I think, surprising details about ancient Israel's spiritual journey, and perhaps even some insights into how their experiences resonate with our own lives today. Okay, let's unpack this. So the study jumps right in, setting this vivid scene, this confession in Nehemiah 9. It wasn't just some random event. It was the direct fruit, as the source puts it, of this huge, transformative Bible study led by Ezra in the chapter just before.
Right. It wasn't spontaneous in that sense. It was a direct response.
Yeah, it sounds less like a casual gathering and more like a really profound, intentional response.
And what's truly fascinating here is just the immediacy and the visceral nature of that response from the people of Israel. On the 24th day of the month, the account describes it so vividly. They're assembled, wearing sackcloth, covered in dirt, fasting.
Wow.
This wasn't just putting on a show, it was a very visible, outward demonstration of deep inward turmoil and, frankly, genuine humility. And beyond that, they took a really significant step. They separated themselves from foreigners, which was a stark reversal of what we'd seen before, like in Ezra chapters 9 and 10, where there was a lot of intermarriage with other nations.
Right. That's a big shift.
Yeah, this act of separation, it really underscores a renewed commitment to their unique identity and purpose.
So this wasn't just a quiet moment of reflection then, clearly. The source tells us they spent a quarter of the day reading from the scroll of the Torah.
A quarter of the day.
And then another quarter of the day confessing and prostrating themselves. That's half a day intensely engaged.
Exactly. Half a day.
What does that level of deep, active engagement tell us about, the nature of their repentance?
Well, it does raise an important question for us, doesn't it? What's the real purpose of digging so deep into the law, into God's perfect standards? And the text seems to clarify that the law's primary job, if you will, is to make us realize our own inability to measure up to God's standard on our own.
Sure.
It's sort of a necessary first step to understanding the need for something greater, for salvation, ultimately.
Right, because without seeing that gap.
Exactly. Without truly grasping that gap between who we are and God's perfect standard, the idea of needing a rescuer or needing a completely different path, it just doesn't fully hit home,
Mm-hmm.
The law, in this context, it's like a powerful mirror showing them exactly where they fell short.
Now, here's where the study reveals something pretty interesting. The confession wasn't just a spontaneous kind of chaotic outburst from the whole crowd.
No.
The source highlights that it actually started specifically with the leaders and the servants of the Lord. It even lists their names. Yeshua, Bamani, Kadmiel, others too. They were the ones who cried out loudly to God and urged the people to worship.
That's such a key detail.
What does that tell us about leadership's role in, guiding a community toward this kind of spiritual transformation?
Well, I think it really underscores that God takes note of our service to him, and that he rewards our labor. It wasn't just random people. It was those in positions of service leading the way. And their worship, crucially, it began by acknowledging God as the creator of all things. That's the foundation, right?
Yeah, the starting point.
Because it establishes his inherent authority to govern human affairs. The study explains that confession is both things. It's a statement of beliefs, and it's a formal admission of guilt. And it all starts with acknowledging God as the offended party, yes, but also as the ultimate authority. If you don't first acknowledge him as the creator, then his rules, his standards, they don't necessarily hold that binding authority over your life.
It's like saying, okay, we recognize who you are, the one who brought everything into existence, and therefore we recognize where we fell short in relation to your design and your righteous standard.
Exactly.
And then they pivot. They pivot into this powerful act of remembering God's past actions. They recall how God chose Abram, called him Abraham, found him faithful, made that covenant to give his descendants the land of the Canaanites and other nations. This isn't just history, is it? It feels like they're building a foundation for their own hope.
Oh, absolutely. It's a truly powerful act of remembering. The people are essentially saying, look, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. By recounting God's faithfulness to Abraham, how he consistently kept his promises, despite, what seemed like impossible odds, they found this deep reassurance for their own future. And in the same way, we can grow in our own faith by recalling God's daily actions in our lives, right? Recognizing his hand in our provision, our guidance. It's actually a very practical way to build trust.
Yeah.
And we can even share that reassurance with others through our personal testimonies of what God has done.
They also remembered God seeing their ancestors' distress way back in Egypt, hearing their cry, performing those signs and wonders against Pharaoh. It's such a potent reminder that God watches over his people. He acts on their behalf, even when they're in the deepest pits of oppression.
Yeah, he wasn't some distant deity. He was intimately involved.
Right.
And not just deliverance, but that continuous, abiding presence. They remembered the column of cloud by day, the fire by night, leading them through the wilderness. And the source draws a powerful parallel here. Just as the Levitical priesthood guided them in Nehemiah's time, we as Christians have the very Spirit of God himself to guide us every single step of our lives.
That's a comforting thought.
It is. We're not left to just figure things out on our own. They also remembered God giving them instructions at Mount Sinai, emphasizing that his laws, like the Sabbath, were actually for their good, to provide rest, health, not simply some burdensome duty.
That's an important distinction.
It is vital. Because while the Sabbath was important, the principle extends, right? We're called to worship God every day, recognizing that his commands are ultimately for our flourishing, not just to impose burdens on us.
But the confession, it doesn't just focus on God's unwavering goodness, does it? It takes a really hard, honest look at their own ancestors' failures.
Yeah, it gets tough.
The text says, even after being fed manna from heaven, given water from the rock, God literally sustaining them, they became arrogant, stiffened their necks, ignored God's commands, and incredibly, even appointed a leader to go back to slavery in Egypt.
It's shocking, isn't it?
It feels like such a betrayal, especially given the miracles they'd just witnessed. How do we even reconcile that kind of provision with such immediate rebellion?
Well, it highlights this profound paradox, Despite God's boundless provision, his clear guidance, people still rebelled. But what's deeply moving here is God's response. The confession states it clearly, quote, "Because you are a God of forgiveness, merciful, full of compassion, slow to grow angry, and full of grace, you did not abandon them."
Wow.
The study draws a connection here, maybe a challenging one for us, to individuals who accept a path of faith, but then, don't live lives set apart for that spiritual purpose. They choose instead to sort of wander under their own power, not really listening to that inner spiritual guidance. Yet God doesn't abandon us. He desires us to listen. He wants us to know. He always wants what's best. Even when we try to do things on our own, his compassion endures.
And then they remember the golden calf. I mean, that's the iconic image of ancient idolatry.
The ultimate example, yeah.
But the source brings that right forward, challenging us directly. It says, look, we might not build a literal golden calf today, but what about our material possessions?
Oof.
When we forget God is our ultimate provider and instead put our trust solely in our bank accounts, our retirement funds, the source suggests this is considered the same thing, like having a golden calf.
That's a powerful and, maybe unsettling modern application.
Definitely makes you think.
And it raises this important question for us. Even when they rebelled so blatantly, making idols, God still didn't abandon them. He continued to care, to guide them, even providing his good spirit to teach them. The text really emphasizes that their sin and disobedience wasn't because they lacked knowledge. It underlines that "I didn't know" isn't really an excuse when it comes to trusting God. He sustained them physically for 40 years in the desert. Their clothes didn't wear out, their feet didn't swell. Sometimes those physical trials, or even just meeting our daily physical needs, can serve as powerful reminders of God's constant presence. It shows us his power is always at work for his people, even when we forget him.
Hearing about God's constant provision despite failures, it reminds me of some of the work we do here through Enduring Freedom Ministries, the folks behind this podcast, the Olive Grove.
Yeah, absolutely.
If this deep dive into ancient history and these spiritual lessons resonates with you, and you're curious about, real-life accounts of God's miraculous workings today, we really encourage you to check out the book Misfits for Jesus, True Accounts of People Experiencing Jesus. You can find it on Amazon.
It's filled with some truly remarkable stories. It shows how God touches lives in the modern world, just like he did for the Israelites all those years ago. It's history coming alive, really.
Exactly. And as Enduring Freedom Ministries, our bigger goal is always to share God's unwavering love and provision with communities, both, spiritually and practically.
It is so important.
Yeah, and right now, we're actually working on establishing a really vital food pantry in Jerusalem, Israel. This is a critical project aimed at meeting basic needs and showing tangible compassion in a very direct way over there.
That's fantastic. A real need.
It is. So if you feel led to support this mission, honestly, any donation, big or small, can truly make a significant difference. You can find more information on how to contribute on our website. We really appreciate any support you can offer. Okay, so back to the confession. It continues, recalling God providing them kingdoms, making their children as numerous as the stars, and finally giving them that promised land.
The fulfillment of the promise.
But then comes a hard truth highlighted in the source. Those who refused to enter the land, back when Moses sent the spies, they perished in the wilderness, though their children were later given the opportunity.
Right. It shows that the lack of faith from one generation can unfortunately have consequences that ripple through to the next.
Yeah, that's sobering.
But it also powerfully reminds us that we don't have to just wallow in the past if we trust in God. He provided victory in Canaan, subduing kings and peoples. The people were reminded it was God, not their own strength, who conquered the enemy. And similarly, we are reminded that Jesus has already won the ultimate victory for us, both for today and for eternity. The choice is truly ours, isn't it? We can choose to walk in this world victorious, knowing that spiritual defeat has been overcome, or we can choose to walk around beaten down and defeated, living as if that victory never happened.
They then remembered taking fortified cities, fertile land, possessing houses full of all kinds of good things, even olive groves, and eating their fill, luxuriating, the text says, in your great goodness.
That word luxuriating, the Hebrew is adon. It speaks of profound self-pleasure. They were definitely enjoying those material blessings.
You can picture it.
You can, but what's fascinating and kind of tragic is the immediate downfall that followed, as the account reveals. The people confess that their ancestors embraced these physical blessings, but then turned their backs on the spiritual giver.
They lost focus.
Completely. They even killed God's prophets who warned them about the dangers of this behavior.
Well, it escalated quickly.
It really did. And it's such a potent reminder for us that while God generously provides for our physical needs, our relationship with him, that's paramount. Material wealth, if we're not careful, can blind us. It can lead to this dangerous feeling of self-sufficiency, of pride.
Yet, even in this persistent pattern of disobedience, of turning away, God's compassion endured. He handed them over to adversaries, sure, but when they cried out,
he heard.
The heavens heard, and he sent saviors. It was this recurring pattern, wasn't it? Israel drifts away, God corrects them, often through hardship.
And then faithfully brings them back. They'd go through periods of trouble, they'd cry out, and he would respond time and time again.
It's quite a cycle.
And that very same pattern applies to us too, doesn't it? When we genuinely seek him, he is faithful to draw near. The confession states that God continued to send messengers despite their arrogance, despite their refusal to listen. The text really highlights God's incredible patient love for mankind. Even when we might question why evil persists in the world, why he doesn't just step in and end it all.
Yeah.
He demonstrates this incredible patience. All of this history, this incredibly detailed confession, it served to remind them, and us, that God is unchanging. His past actions give profound confidence for the future.
We can trust his character.
Absolutely. We can always trust in his consistent character.
And it all kind of culminates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The people conclude this great confession by admitting that their current state, they were under foreign rule at this time, sort of slaves in their own land. It was a direct result of leaving the path God had laid out for them.
Yes, they owned it.
They openly declared that God was just in sending correction because they had willingly strayed. They'd gotten lost.
And that recognition, that need for a fundamental change of direction, that is precisely what the text calls repentance. It's not just feeling bad about sin.
Being more active than that.
It's an active conscious turning. And repentance, they show us here, leads to commitment. They vowed to get back on the right path and let God lead the way. For us, this is really what it means to make Jesus the Lord of our lives. You know, it's that commitment to his guidance, a conscious choice to follow his path. They understood that God had already provided for their needs.
Right. The provision was there.
The provision was there. They simply needed to be in the proper place, on his path, to receive those blessings. So when we find ourselves in need, maybe the first step is recognizing he has already provided, and we just need to let him guide us back onto the path to find it.
Wow. What an immersive journey through Nehemiah chapter 9 that was. We've seen how Israel's great confession was this deep, honest dive into their own history, a powerful acknowledgement of God's consistent faithfulness contrasted with humanity's repeated, yet somehow always forgiven, rebellion. It's truly a powerful narrative, isn't it?
It really is. It's a profound testament to God's unwavering compassion and his persistent desire for us to return to the path he's provided. And the story reminds us, like we just said, that while God has already provided for our needs, we have to be in the proper place on his path to truly receive and experience those blessings.
Yeah.
It's just a fundamental truth for any spiritual journey, whether you're talking ancient Israel or our lives today.
So thinking about all this, what does it mean for you listening right now as you navigate your own journey? Maybe consider this. In your own life, how do you recognize when you've perhaps left the path God has laid out? What does it truly look like for you to lean into the unchanging nature of God, trusting in his provision and guidance, especially when you feel like you've wandered?
That's a challenging question.
It is, but one that's absolutely worth exploring. And hey, before you go, make sure to subscribe to the Olive Grove podcast right here on YouTube so you can continue diving deep with us into these important texts and topics. Thanks for joining us.